Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are in this world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. We have a really great show for you on tap today. I can personally attest to this. But before we do get started with the webinar, I do have a couple of housekeeping items I do need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event will be available to you on demand. You'll be receiving a link in an email post-event that will take you right to it. And we also are taking questions from the audience. So at any time during the webinar you have a question, just use your control panel and submit your questions. And hopefully we'll have about 10 or 15 minutes near the end of the hour, and we'll go through those audience questions. Okay, with that, I will go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Security, Policy, and Drift, Getting Database Risk User Under Control in Release Automation. Our speaker today is Yaniv Yehuda, who is co-founder and CTO of DBmaestro. Hi, Yaniv, how are you?
Hi, great being here today.
Great. Well, thanks for joining me today. I am going to go ahead and just turn it over to you and let you give your presentation now.
Thank you very much. So, hi everybody. Today I will be talking about DevOps and security and all the stuff that's connected, essentially to make sure that databases can play a part. So recently I've been using this slide in a lot of my presentations because I think this is really a keynote from whatever we're doing. So it's a quote from Gene Kim, who I love following and see like what he's posting and publishing, and essentially I think it encapsulates greatly what DevOps is. DevOps is not something that you have to do. It's not mandatory, but he phrased it perfectly, but neither is survival. So today DevOps is something that everybody is doing. It's not a hype, it's like reality. We've been doing all kinds of surveys. We've been looking at other companies' surveys, and we can see a very clear trend of adoption, which is not about a hype. This is like becoming reality and everywhere. So at the beginning, when you think about DevOps and you think about CI/CD, you think about startups, cool guys, you know, doing the advanced stuff, extreme programming, etc. But when you actually look at the information and talk to the companies, you learn that it's not the case. Actually, more enterprises are implementing DevOps than smaller companies. And I think talking to a lot of them, I think it's coming from not just the need to be competitive and to be faster with time to market. It's about creating repeatable processes, which may become even much more important when you're a big enterprise in comparison to a smaller company or a startup. So a startup would gain a lot from being able to run fast, but at the same rate, an enterprise would gain even more because processes are more complex, more people are involved, more signatures or whatever gates that you need to go through. And the more the process is streamlined and constructed and everybody's chipping in and everybody know what's their part, the overall synergy is dramatically more positive. So seeing that enterprises are essentially even ahead of SMBs is when you know and you're following what's happening is no longer a surprise. So on the right side, you can see that actually this is something that is being built on gradually. So companies are not waking up one day and say, yeah, I'm doing DevOps, everybody start doing DevOps. It's not working like that. This is something that you need to adopt. This is something that you need to change the way the organization works. It's about culture. It's about processes. It's about state of mind. It's about tools. It's about the whole thing together. And today I would speak a lot about the database side, which is becoming a challenge. So just to relate to the graph on the right, you can see that the adoption rate starting from companies who are doing partial implementation, starting with their first projects, maybe experimenting, seeing what's in that, and what is the ROI and how it's performing. And when they see that actually providing value, they're implementing more divisions into a company-wide implementation. But not a surprise to anybody who knows why databases are different than code. This is not exactly what's happening when you look at application code versus database. So on the graph on the bottom, you can actually see that the application side code, Java.NET, whatever that might be, websites, etc., they're much ahead in the implementation curve. And the databases are not. And what I'm going to do today is talk about that gap, what we see, how we think one should act in order to solve that challenge. Because at the end of the day, you cannot have a balanced solution, a balanced operations if you're just doing part of the job well and some not as well. So think about automating 3 parts or 2 parts of the load and manually doing other stuff. Of course, that would not balance. That would not be able to take care of frequency and load. And this is exactly the challenge and sometimes the blamestorming that we see in companies. I've had the opportunity to sit down in large companies and to hear from the side large group of developers trying to become more agile, saying to the DBAs, yeah, we need to run faster, you need to give us control of the database, we need to be agile, we have our goals, we have our tasks, we need to meet the deadline. And the DBAs sit on the other side and say, yeah, but we are actually responsible for the safety of the database, for the health of it, for the uptime, and make sure that there's no extra risk to break it. And this is a real dilemma. And when you think about it, when we had waterfall processes, when we go back a few years and you think about having a release every a few months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months even, you have time to get ready for releases. So on the database front, you talk to the DBA, he asks you what you want to do, maybe review the scripts that you are doing, or maybe he's building them himself, the DBA, or the group of DBAs, and you have time to get ready. So you look at the database, you plan it, you maybe even rehearse it on the side, and then you roll out that extra smooth rollout. The problem is that it is a slow process. And if you look to the right side, in today's world, this is no longer something that you can practice. You have releases every 2 or 3 weeks, sometimes even daily or continuously. You have CI/CD processes, and the application just cranks up more and more and more changes. It's not like magically you suddenly have dozens of releases, but releases become smaller, more focused, less risky, but much more frequent. So instead of having one big release every a few months, you have numerous smaller releases that influence smaller pieces of the application in the database, and you need to take care of that. So just try to imagine what happens when you put a DBA or a group of DBAs that are responsible to ship changes out to the database and tell them, now you have to take care of everything in the same way, in the same process. That would never work, because they would need to constantly just deal with another small change and another small change and another small change, and it makes no sense. And of course, this brings back to the blamestorming and the challenge and the tension that becomes a part. So we've seen all kinds of results. Sometimes the DBAs say, well, I don't care, you would not release it, and now everything gets stuck when you need to do that database release. You'll wait 2-3 days for the DBA to get the ticket, act upon it, and make the change. We see that every day when we go to large organizations to deal with infrastructure. Yeah, provision me a database, provision me a server, provision me this and that. No problem. Yeah, 2 weeks later you get it. This is no longer something that you can live with when you're doing agile processes, CI/CD, and DevOps. So how do you solve this? How do you let the DBAs or the DevOps people responsible for the database feel more safe to relax control, to give developers more tools to maybe do self-provisioning, to do self-releases for one environment or more? And how do you let the developers do the changes in a more controlled way so they don't break anything drastically, so you don't end up having a horror story to go tell your friends about? So have that in mind and consider what's actually happening. So this is a recent survey from 2018, and we actually asked companies what is the frequency of their releases. Okay, so on the left is daily releases, weekly releases, monthly releases, quarterly, bi-quarterly, and annually. So you can definitely see that the most of the organizations are tending to do quicker and quicker releases. 2017 is in green, 2018 plan is in blue. So not only that you're getting that most of the organization are doing either monthly, weekly, or daily releases, everyone is planning to accelerate. Everybody is planning to have higher frequency next year. So 40% were doing daily releases in 2017, 24% are planning to do that in 2018. 2017, 2018, exactly. So this is obviously happening. This is not something that you can just ignore. So hold that thought and then take into consideration what happens when you do these quick releases and you're not built for it. You don't have the process for it. This is when you have frequent failures. Okay, so the quicker you go, which is from the right to the left, the more failures you have on daily basis, on weekly basis. So this is no surprise. If you have more releases and you're using the same process, you have less time to deal with them, less time to validate them, less time to check them. You're in a hurry. You're just chasing your tail. So more challenges and more failures are imminent. And this is, of course, missing the point, because nobody wants to have more errors and more failures and more downtime when they're actually trying to get to be more efficient and have better productivity and quicker time to market. So why is that happening? One of the biggest challenges is that we've not actually completed that DevOps process implementation when we actually go forward. So we see a lot of organizations where you want to find out like who's doing changes. So DBAs are still the majority of people responsible for doing the changes. Okay, some of them do it with the dev team, some of them are doing with the DevOps team, but it's still the smaller group of the DBA. So number games is the numbers game is against the DBA. There's always fewer DBAs than developers. So we need to find a way to do it differently. You look at how the DBA is being integrated into a DevOps team. Some of them completely are out of the picture. Okay, some of them are trying to, or to some extent, meaning it's not like they're part of the team. They're not part of the meetings, the planning, and this is, of course, it doesn't make any sense. Same goes for security people. You cannot just do a release, and when it's supposed to go to production, ask the security people if they have comments. Because if they would, what would you do? You would need to go back to square one and refactor any comment that they have. So everybody needs to become a part of that DevOps team. Everybody needs to become part of the loop. And the sooner that you are in the loop, the more that loop becomes efficient. So then, just to complete that point of view, we also surveyed like how people are actually introducing changes. Believe it or not, 15% are actually logging into IDEs on production and executing commands through the IDEs, clicking add column, add index, whatever. So this is completely unrepeatable process. This is as manual as it gets. Some of them are executing scripts, which is better, but not always as safe as one might think, and we'll discuss this in a few minutes. And others are starting to use tools, automation tools, checkup tools, testing tools, which is, of course, becoming a much more healthy point of view. So what happens if the database is not part of the DevOps strategy? What happens when the DBAs are not a team player, or the data, not the DBAs, the database is not like considered as early as possible? So what I wanted to do today is share with you some horror stories. First horror story is the thing in your database. So this is actually on a meeting that I attended. I was talking to a DBA who told me a very interesting story. He said, I was working in a major bank. We were implementing Agile processes. The DBA added an index on a 180 million record table in production to deal with performance issues. The thing is, it was never documented. It was added directly to production. A developer was supposed, and this is again for the agility, they were trying to shift weight into development. Developer was using a compare and sync tool. He was like comparing development with production. They actually didn't have a fair and good testing environment, which is another issue, but let's keep that for a second. And that compare and sync tool, look at development, look at production, no index in development and index in production, created a drop index command, deleted the index, and the application went down for a lot of time, 36 hours actually. It was an extended time because it took them a lot of time to understand really what happened. Suddenly, everything turned into crawling space, and nothing moved. Nobody knew that something happened because nobody initiated anything. And essentially, when you look at the postmortem and try to understand what has happened, is that the DBA made an undocumented change, so nobody knew about it. It was a good change, but it was not part of a proper release. It was not part. It was not tested. It was not part of the build. It was not documented. It was not part of the rollout plan. Happens, okay? Then the developer used a tool that is used mainly let's say suitable for manual work. And he used it in an automatic fashion. So when you work with a compare and sync tool, you should look at the results. You should look at what that tool is telling you and take a decision. So when you see that there's no index in development and there is an index in production, true, moving from development to production should by default say drop the index, but it makes no sense if you look at it and think. Yet that was used in an automated way, and it was automatically dropped. In addition, the developer actually was not supposed to have any access to production, and he didn't document anything. So now try to think what happened. So nobody knows about the index that shouldn't be there. Nobody knows it was dropped, and all they are experiencing is nothing is moving. Now, you know how much time it takes to rebuild an index for a 180 million records table. That takes forever. So by the time they found it and they rebuilt it and it went up again, 36 hours of a banking application completely down. This is painful. Second story I wanted to share with you, misery. Actually, I think you know this story. This story is actually, I think it broke social media, I think 6 or 9 months ago. College student out of the like first day in work internship, going into his new job and essentially wiping out a database. This was very, very hot on I think it was Reddit, and he just completely erased a production database. Not only that, the CTO told him, go away, don't come back, legal would talk to you. So completely frightened, he went home and posted this this post. And of course, everybody came down hard on the company because the process was all wrong. You should never get into that position. But just think about it. and I love this post on Twitter. If having a coffee in the morning doesn't wake you up, try deleting the database in production instead. So you think about it and it sounds funny, and then you see the replies and you say, yeah, I did it as well. That's part of being a DBA. Oops, yes, we know. So many replies saying this is not an accident. This is actually happening to so many people. This is not a one-time thing. This is something that just, maybe it's the right passage of a DBA, you know, kill something very important, make it well somehow again. But this is, of course, it doesn't make any sense. Okay, and just to zoom out on one reply that I think sums it up. Why would you have access to a production database? Okay, why isn't that any better? So to that poor guy who went home on the first day and thought his future is lost, it's not his fault, obviously. There's a lot of pitfalls in this story and for that company, and it's not a surprise that it happened. Maybe to a first day of work, that's extreme, but when your production database credentials are openly shared to everyone and you can just go ahead and update something, this is just a matter of time. When there's no policies, you know, anybody can go in. There's no daytime updates, disaster recovery, backups. There's no process. There's no policy. This is just meaning one thing: you're letting your safety nets down without even trying. Okay, there's no roles and access. A junior DBA should not have access to push changes to production. Yes, DevOps is talking about helping that transition of responsibility to let developers be more responsible for the things that they're shipping to production. And yes, you need to build it, but that needs to be built gradually. This is something that you practice a long time. This is something that you first make sure that it's working, then you extend it to integration, QA, and pre-prod, and you always have the hand on the switch to make sure that you can go to production on the decision, like the difference between continuous delivery and continuous deployment. You don't go to complete continuous deployment on your first day, okay? And of course, if you don't have any backups, well, you have just yourself to blame. So this is, of course, something that you should not do. So what I've mentioned here is a list of issues that come up again and again when we talk to organizations, when we talk to professionals, to DBAs, to DevOps people, to development managers. And I think when we look at the market and we're trying to see how things are essentially combining, we see from one side agility and time to market and CI/CD. These are clear business requirement. This is pushing us forward. We need to be more agile. We have no time to wait. Our competitors are moving. Market demands are changing. Governance, regulation. We have GDPR. Everybody's stressed. We need to implement this. We need to implement that. So everything is changing very fast. So we have no choice. We cannot work in the methods we used to work 5 years ago because it's safer. Okay, it's safer maybe for the deployment process. It's definitely not safer for the organization because you're not responding to anything. You cannot respond. Or if you're responding in a time span of a year, your response is irrelevant because a year from now, the requirement might be completely different. And then you look at the other side of the equation. You need to spin things to the internet, to mobile applications. Everything is more accessible. Social media, everything is connected. So by definition, breaches and hacks happen more oftenly. More data is online, so you need to cater for that, both for GDPR and security and accessibility. So you cannot just ignore that. It goes together. So it's not just DevOps. It's what emerging as a connection from these shifts of paradigms and the new age is it's DevSecOps. It's not enough to do efficient development. It's not enough to do efficient ops processes. It's not enough to deal with security at the end of the process. You need to do that early on. You need to build the whole process to take care of development, security, and ops in mind from the beginning. If you have security people in the loop, if you have DBAs people in the loop from the beginning, their comments would go in on a shorter feedback loop, preferably on design time. Hopefully not, but it's okay on the first cycle of releases, but not before you go to production, because obviously that is a clear line of the amount of rework that would be needed in order to deal with these changes. So you find something wrong with your database design, you find something wrong with the way a procedure was implemented. If you find out about it in integration, that's good. If you find out about QA, it's still good. If you find out about it in pre-production, not so good. Because if only then you deal with the load, it's a bit late. If you find out about it in production, that's a shame. Okay, so this is what DevSecOps is all about. Being able to shorten the feedback loop, react to things faster, make sure that you take care of stuff ahead of time, proactively, and be able to deal with the frequency and capacity of these changes in an automated process. So this is my personal opinion. I know there's a lot of DevOps peers that would say DevOps has nothing to do with tools. Right. DevOps is a philosophy. DevOps is not connected to tools. But if you want to implement the processes behind DevOps, you need repeatability. You need to be able to build your code once and store it in a binary repository. You need to then take that binary repository artifacts and release it to all of the different environments in the same way, the same process. So at the end of the day, implementing DevOps efficiently is connected to tools. Tools like Jenkins and Jira and Bamboo and CA Atomic and Zebia Labs and Nexus and Artifactory, everything pitches in order to create a tool chain that would help you deliver a safer process and a more consistent way of delivery of your changes. So with that, I would like to tell you a bit about how DBmaestro is trying to help with that task of DevOps. DBmaestro is focusing on the database. We're not focusing on application. We're not focusing on web servers, etc. We are focusing on the database. So first of all, helping catering for DevOps is all about time to market, as I said. So building CI/CD release pipelines, identifying specific challenges that are relevant for the database, which are less relevant for like application code, like drift or configuration that might be different between environments, and dealing with security as soon as possible. So helping you meet with compliance and enforce roles and responsibilities, as well as balance policies as a mean of solving some of the challenges between developers and DBAs. It's not like developers and DBAs are not working together, but sometimes they have different agendas. Sometimes their interest is not in line. So being able to do that and to then follow an audit. So if you need to follow compliance and either if you have to submit your reports to an auditing authority or anything else, this is very good to have that like built into your processes. So what DBmaestro offers you essentially is a way to build release pipelines. Release pipelines would essentially structure a way to push changes from your development to integration, QA, and production, and of course be able to tell you what version of your database application you have in each environment. This is very important because this helps us construct that repeatable process. So instead of running script manually and having to go and see if they actually run, if they had an error or not, this is doing that for you. But it's doing that for you in a holistic process, meaning it would look at the database, see if it's ready to receive the change, look at the database, see if the change actually made it in safely, etc., and report back that everything went fine. So this is one side of the equation, being able to do releases very efficiently. The other side is making sure that you don't break anything. Breaking stuff in the database is sadly too easy. So I would say even more than it's easy, it's harder to fix than application side. So if you have a problem, you released the wrong piece of code for your .NET or Java code, you can very easily take the right revision back from your Artifactory or Nexus and reapply it to the correct server. With an automated process, you would do that in seconds. If you drop an index, you now have to rebuild it. If you drop a column, that might be more challenging. If you drop a table or the whole database, we all know about the misery story that I just mentioned. So first of all, you need to take care of the risk factors, and I'll talk about this in a second. But secondly, you need to make sure that the configuration can take care of that repeatable process. So let's say you have that update going out to the database, and you tested it in your integration, and it works, and then you go to QA and it doesn't work because QA's configuration is a bit different because someone made changes there to test something. Okay, so that means that your testing processes might not be up to spec with a truly repeatable process, because then when you move to the next environment, maybe it's yet again a bit different because you had a hotfix to production, and then you find out a whole new bug that is just, it doesn't exist in previous environments. So in order to push out a truly repeatable process, you need to make sure that your update packages are immutable and are going forward in the same way. So you have package A that goes into the first environment, the second, the third, etc. But the configuration of the database needs to be identical, because if the configuration is not identical and you have a table space of one size in one database and another size in another database, and you have an index that you don't know about it in a third one, then your results would be inconclusive, and your application might behave differently in each environment. So DBmaestro could help you automatically learn about all of these challenges and tell you about all of these drifts. By way of any release automation tool, it would of course be able to report back and give you a lot of statistics and scorecards about how your release processes are behaving, how many failures do you have. Maybe a team is working quicker, but also fails much more rapidly. So analyzing behavior from DevOps scorecards perspective is always a good method of analyzing across time. So not just day in, day out, zooming into I had this problem or that problem, but zoom out and see maybe across 3 months, 6 months, am I really getting to be more efficient? Am I delivering quicker? Or maybe I'm creating more releases and failing much more rapidly, and I'm just wasting more time and more energy without really having any benefit. So analyzing and having scorecards and essentially business monitoring is critical to any implementation of any release automation process. I did mention roles and permissions, and of course, being able to follow security is critical. So some companies, like financial companies, want to have segmentation. One project maybe should not know about another. Maybe it's even some security organization, and you should just be able to separate not just project, but roles and duties. If you are a developer, should you be able to push changes forward? Yes, if you want to be efficient and maybe even self-provision changes to integration environment, that can be very efficient, but maybe that should stop there. Or maybe once that project is very efficient, they push changes to QA and pre-production. And when you have a very streamlined, well-oiled process, they go all the way to production. But this is something that you should be able to control and throttle, so it doesn't spin out of your control. Okay, so who can update production, who can update pre-production, etc. This is something that you should be able to very easily control. And I would like to end with policies. I mentioned this a couple of times. This is a way that we see very efficient in balancing that equation between developers and DBAs, or developers and DevOps people. You want to release changes, you want to do it frequently. It's hard to have a person looking at every piece of code that goes out and asking, is that okay? Should that be different? Is that secured? Maybe the code is not correct. Maybe you're not following a coding standard. Maybe you're not following naming conventions. Okay, if you have a manual process to follow that would either be statistic or inefficient. If you have that process automated, then you cover everything. This is classic static analysis for your code quality for the database. So once you do that, once you apply that as a step within your release process, then you can filter out data loss risks. If someone is trying to drop a table, drop a column, truncate the whole data, that could light up or be even automatically blocked if that goes to production unsigned or unapproved. So policies are critical to make sure that you can really start moving fast, but not without lowering the risk. So I think an example I relate to and tend to give a lot. It's just like a very fast car. If you have a very fast car and all you have is that acceleration throttle, and you don't have good headlights and you don't have brakes, you're gonna hit that wall in terminal velocity. If you had good headlights, you know what's coming, and you have good brakes, you know how to evade it or how to stop and evaluate what you need to do, then you can really drive fast and not crash. So having all of that and then connecting it with the ability to know who did what, when, and why, just plain good old audits that can serve GDPR, HIPAA, SOX, then you have your bases covered and you can practice safer DevOps. I wanted to end with a third horror story. This one is actually a personal one, a horror story that was prevented. This one is tagged, "I know what you did last deployment." And actually, it happened to me during a live webinar. A lot of people on the line. I was demonstrating our product and was actually simulating a drift in production. So I had a drift in production. The product prevented me from overriding it, and I manually reverted that drift in order to go ahead and deploy my changes to the simulated production. But as I did that manually, I actually did not do it correctly. And I didn't really get what's going on because, you know, I'm talking and demonstrating at the same time. You know, it is a webinar, so I can't say I'm perfectly relaxed, but I had like an error and it didn't go forward. So I tried it again and it failed again, and I tried it again and it failed again. And because this was a webinar, I was not taking the time to actually read what the error message said. So 2-3 times it happened and I just skipped it and went to the next example. And then when the webinar ended, I actually went back and looked at the recording. And the error message says, you have a drift. You cannot override that object because it's not what you're expecting. And actually, then I realized that I tried to revert that drift, but I actually did not do it correctly. So production was still drifted, and it did not fit the configuration that the release process was expecting. And obviously, I was prevented from going forward. So no matter how hard I tried to push that, DBmaestro would not let me do that. That change to production. It was a specific procedure. So create or replace. Obviously, if you run a create or replace statement, you know, if you don't have the right tools, it would just replace it. Nobody would even know that that code was overwritten. But just consider the situation. So this is a webinar. Obviously, it's not optimal conditions to do demonstration. You know, everybody laughs about the demo gods and everything failing in a demo. So from my perspective, this was just one of these glitches, like the blue screen that Microsoft had on one of their webinars, and everybody made a big laugh of it. But essentially, you know, a live webinar when people are watching is not that different than a production update. You're stressed, people are waiting, you're under the gun, you don't want to make any mistakes. So it's pretty much the same. The opportunity for you to actually not read well into an error message and overlook something is just the same. It's quite high. So point here is people make mistakes. And what we need to make sure that happens is that we have the right tools to support our processes and the safety nets to make sure that even if we make mistakes, they're either highlighted and blocked, or we get proper warnings, or if not, it wouldn't go forward. So one thing in mind, make sure that you don't break your database. Make sure that you don't truncate the data, drop the whole thing, drop an index that blocks the application from running, or just overriding a small bug in a procedure in production that nobody would even know, except for the damage that would probably come up a few days or weeks later when you know what's hits the fan. So I found this image on the internet. I thought it would be funny but relevant. Never send a human to do a machine's job. Release automation is a machine job. So with that, I would love to get your questions.
Yeah, great. We've gotten a couple really good questions in so far. There's time, though. If you do have a question for Yanu, please go ahead and use that control panel and submit your questions, and hopefully we'll have enough time to get through everybody's. Okay, let's go ahead and get started here. Scott is asking, is there a generalized strategy for dealing with the culture problem related to DevOps for databases? Because it is not easy.
Oh, obviously, it is not easy. It is not easy. I'll tell you what is my perspective. What I tend to see two kind of approaches. I see the organizations that are just starting with DevOps, starting with automation, starting with CI/CD, implementing Jenkins, like just hit the code and start running. And what usually happens is that they either get it well or it's not working perfectly, but with time it is stabilizing. And usually they would start with one team and get to a point where they see success and then start rolling out. But usually these kinds of companies are starting with their code, and they leave database aside because the DBA would not let them do that automatically. They say it's risky, they say it's complicated, they say, you know, all of the stuff that I just mentioned in my slides. And then when it gets really efficient, they realize it doesn't scale because they keep hitting these walls of inefficiency where you have a release. I just said, I think it was 3 weeks ago, in a New York bank, and the guy told me the release process was a developer is sending a script to the DBA. It takes 2-3 days for the DBA to open the ticket and react to it, not because he's lazy, because he just has tons of things to do, and it just takes time. So for them, it was a bottleneck. When you reach that bottleneck, believe me, the whole organization would require you to implement a proper solution, and everybody who's resisting this, and I did see some people like holding the door and trying to make sure that nobody's doing any type of I actually heard the lady saying, over my dead body you'll have a release more than once every 6 months. I don't think she works there anymore, but this is just a thing that by the power of transition that would happen. So at some point, even if you're not initiating it, it would be required, and the whole organization would just demand this. The second type of companies that I see is actually the ones, maybe the ones who got in a bit later. They had a chance to see what others are doing, and they realized from the beginning, and today there's also a lot more information, that it's not just about one aspect. You need to take care of your code, you need to take care of your database, you need to take care of security, you need to take care of your infrastructure, you need to take care of your testing. So it's a combination of things, and it works perfectly. And you hear the great stories about, you know, Amazon and Facebook and like the most extremes implementations of this methodology is when everything ticks. So from my perspective, the best way to try and do this is start with one team, find the team who is most passionate and is most connected to implementing automation and good processes, and is open to change and is not afraid to fail, because some things would not work correctly and until they do. So it is a process of evolvement. But once you have that team implementing and improving that process until it's good or perfect, and then you can share with everybody else the success, everybody else would want to join in on this, because nobody wants to look at the great process, hear about that team who is pushing out changes quicker with less issues and more stability, and not try to follow them. So this is my advice on that.
Yeah, everybody wants to be on the team that's winning, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Great. Okay, Scott actually has a follow-up question. When utilizing the cloud for DevOps, do you recommend moving on-prem databases to the cloud as is, such as lift and shift, or utilize the cloud-native database solutions with their built-in tooling?
Oh, this is a tougher question. This is a lot about your you know, your own, how they say, your miles may vary.
Yeah,
but
right.
So I tell you what, I was a bit surprised. I was always thinking when considering cloud is that people would like do development on-prem and deploy to a production cloud to deal with scalability, to deal with like scaling out and having maybe resources that you can get from Amazon or from Microsoft or whatever. And turns out that it's not actually what's happening. The bigger trend is actually developers are starting to develop on cloud because it's easier to spin up testing environment and development environments. You have online tools for development. You have online repositories, things like TFS Online from Microsoft. So a lot of tools for development in the cloud, which makes the whole thing easier to manage. Less resources, less maintenance, less processes, and you know, the other stuff that slows you down. So like what I'm seeing is actually development being implemented in the cloud and production still on premise. So now a lot of the providers of the database are looking into this. I've talked to product managers in Oracle and Microsoft as well, and they are creating solutions to help you lift and shift or like take your production and very easily migrate that to the cloud. If you're in a position to restructure, someone's train is beeping. If you're in a position to restructure your whole application and rebuild it on cloud databases or shared infrastructure, this is something that you should consider. But from my maybe more practical get it done perspective, I would definitely, and this is again my personal opinion, I would definitely go with the lift and shift and not rebuilding of stuff. Every time you rebuild, you think you could do it better than, and then you only find out how much knowledge and work and pain went into what you're about to replace. So don't forsake your investment too quickly. That's my personal.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, we're about eight minutes to the top of the hour. I think we have time for one or two more questions here. Our next question is from Mitch. He asks, is there a way to tie database changes to application code changes in a pipeline so that they all move together?
Oh, absolutely. This is the way it should be done. This is the way it is done. So in essence, when you have these processes, you're either using ServiceNow or Jira or TFS work items or whatever ways you're using to have requests or tickets or work items and tasks. So each database change should and is being associated to a ticket, and then you can just release either by tickets or by collection of tickets, or decide that you want to promote something and delay something that is not maturing or not stabilizing enough. So this is definitely something that's the way to go.
All right, great. Let's see. Just a reminder, we do have a couple more minutes left. So if you have a question, it's not too late. And if we don't get to all the questions, then Yanev will have a copy of all the questions. So I'm sure either he or somebody else from his organization will be happy to follow up with you guys offline. So don't hesitate if you don't think there's enough time left. There's enough time left, so go ahead and get your question in. Our next question, can you provide examples of policies that you can set within DBmaestro platform? Within the DBmaestro platform.
Examples about policies. Things that you could do. So it's in essence, I would not go into like the details because I don't think the details are too interesting, but you should cater for security items. Like if someone was trying to grant too high of permissions in a script, you want to maybe pause and raise a flag so someone reviews and say, you know, you are about to grant DBA to everybody. Really? Is that needed? Or if someone is doing execute immediate, this is something that can be hacked on runtime, and maybe like you can do SQL injection, etc. So this is one aspect. Other aspects are for coding practices, because we don't want a DBA or a DevOps person to have to go and look at each and every change. You want to make sure that, for instance, coding practices are followed. So naming conventions, not doing select star, not doing things that would jump up and really, if someone would review the code, you'd say it doesn't make sense. So these are the kind of policies, and combine that with, of course, things that are relevant for the whole organization. So nobody introduces changes to production during the day, or you may introduce some changes, but if you're going to rebuild an index in production, it's only allowed to run in the nighttime. So these kinds of policies can be easily used out of the box with DBmaestro, and of course you can create your own if you want to protect specific tables, etc., or something.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's pretty much all the time that we have for our question and answer session. I want to thank everybody who did submit a question. And as I said before, if we didn't get to your question, Yaniv will have a copy of all of the questions that came in. So I'm sure that somebody from DBmaestro will be getting back in touch with you to get your question answered. Today's webinar, just as a reminder, has been recorded, so if you missed any or all of the event, you can access it on demand. You should be receiving an email shortly that has a link to the webinar on demand. The webinar also will be on the DevOps.com website so that you can access it there at your convenience. While you're there, please go ahead and take a look at the other webinars that we have listed on DevOps.com. Hopefully there'll be at least one or two that pique your interest. Yaniv, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a great presentation. I hope you had as much fun as I did.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much for having me today, and hope you found the presentation interesting. Have a great day.
Yes, thank you everybody for joining me today. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I bid you good day.